Okay, try now.
Hello.
I still can't hear her. Who's three? Why would
There's
you
no
be a
three.
third
There's no
person
three,
there?
Fran. You're killing me. Killing me with this, Fran.
Okay. That, maybe that,
Oh, no, I don't think
maybe
so.
that. Okay.
Sounds
Yeah.
up.
Do you have your audio on?
I do. Yes.
Do you have your mic on?
Yes.
I can't hear it.
No, that's all.
This is so weird. And I don't want to bother them,
I can't.
the help desk. Okay. This book is really good. It took me like about an hour and a half to read it.
But Fran, there's no sound.
And I can't understand why I'm not getting. I'm gonna ask them for the sound.
Let me just check one other thing.
What? Don't forget this.
Oh,
You got it?
wait a minute.
Oh, sound. Okay. Now I think. Can you? Let me see if you can. I can hear you.
Hello.
Oh, thank God.
Oh, good.
Oh, thank God.
Oh, good.
This goes straight to YouTube, and I'm like, I'm not used to this. And I
I
usually hide my face. I don't like people to see me.
well,
And
you're
I'm used.
beautiful, and I love your
You.
sweatshirt.
Oh, this? I have
Yes.
3 shirts on. I weigh 90 pounds. It's 20 degrees out there.
Yeah, it's cold. It's cold here too.
Oh, thank God. Okay, here we
It's
go.
all good.
This book is great, especially when I thought about it. No internet, no cell phones. None. I loved it.
Thank
Did you
you.
ever try? I tried that once with my family. I said, no, nobody has dinner time to talk.
Right. Right. You know what? This is my third book. And with
Yeah.
each of my books, I got rid of my cable television for long stretches of time because I didn't want to be interrupted. So,
Let me put the other glasses on so I can see the pages in the
okay.
book. So that prologue really made me cry. How did you create that? Let me tell you something. I have read in the last 16 years that I've been crazy enough to do this,
Right.
too many books. And some of them, you have to be honest, your book I read like this, and I'm saying, this is so good. This is
Ah,
great. I understand it. And otherwise, I don't do an interview with somebody. And this is my fourth stream.
wow.
I was doing Blog Talk Radio. It was easy. Okay, hi, how are you? This is like I have to do hair, makeup, and nails.
I hear you.
And now I can't deal with this anymore. So
I
how did you
know.
create? I felt so bad for Ruth.
Well, thank you. And thank you also for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you for that. Um,
Yeah.
it's so funny with this book. This is my third book, and this one hit a little differently. I heard this story at a book club, believe it or not, about this woman who walked through Scranton with a chair. And somebody in the book club told me the story, and it just stayed with me. And it was completely different. It was the 1800s. It was a white woman. It was a completely different story, but the bones of it stayed with me. And I started writing the new book. I started writing Rain Breaks No Bones. And I originally started the book with Violet going into town. But I kept hearing this other story in my head, and I couldn't understand how I could put them together. And I literally out loud said one day to Ruth, my character, listen, I will tell your story, but it doesn't belong in this book. And she didn't agree with me. So eventually I gave in and I did what any good writer is supposed to do. I listened to my characters, and that's where the prologue came from.
You're very lucky because I published 22 books.
Wow.
And yeah, they're not going anywhere. Because now one of the publishers did what yours did and said, would you please read it?
Ah,
And I'm very particular too, very particular. I
Wow.
have to read the book before I decide to do the interview because recently I've interviewed some people that I had to hang up on because
Oh
that's how
no.
rude they were rude.
Oh no, that's awful. You're
It
doing us
was,
a
and I
favor.
said, if you think I'm going to publish your review, you got to be kidding me. They were nasty for no reason, and I don't deserve it because I don't publish negative reviews ever.
No, here you are being a good literary citizen and helping us.
I
So
wrote
thank
I
you.
wrote yours, and I said, okay, good. So now we got my characters. We got Violet and Lily, and where do they go? And why was she blessed? And then we have to get to my favorite character, Daisy.
Ah. So
I
your
love
question is
Daisy.
what? So a question about Violet and
Violet and was Violet and Lily.
well, it's funny because so this is my third book. And although the books can be read in any order, they are connected. And in my first book, Sing in the Morning, Cry at Night, I created the character of Violet, and she's
Mhm.
very loosely based on my grandmother's sister, Pearl.
Oh,
So, no, my grandmother's sister, Janet. I apologize. In real life, my grandmother had a sister who, on the day of her baptism, she was 7 years old. She was out playing with sparklers. Her dress caught on fire and she went up in flames. She survived for 3 days, and according to the story, she sang hymns. So when she passed away, people all over Scranton came to see the body of the little girl who sang hymns. So, as tragic as that story was, and that's the story I grew up on, I always wondered about her sister Janet, who was in the yard. Janet didn't have a very happy life, and up and down. For example, Janet was married 4 times to the same 2 men. So Janet had a little trouble making up her mind. And I always wondered how much of the sadness in her adult life was based on what she witnessed that day.
mm.
So that was my Violet that I created in as an 8-year-old in my first novel. And now in this book, she's 50 years old and she's dealing with that trauma because so often we bury the trauma. The first book is 1913. People didn't send their kids for therapy back then. You just moved on. So the new book, Rain Breaks No Bones, it's 1955. There is this generational trauma and she's learning to cope with it. And
This is so good. My grandmother was came from a Polish concentration camp.
really?
Yeah, and I never
Wow.
knew, but I didn't know her story. Like you're saying, you didn't know the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So
So
one
many of
day
them kept it. Go on.
I was listening to my mother, who didn't want me to know anything, and I happened to be in the back of the car pretending I was sleeping, and I heard them say something about my grandmother and sisters. I also didn't know that my grandmother was not my grandmother. She was my mother's stepmother. It was a whole big story. A whole big story. My grandmother died when my mother was born. So my grandfather married Katie, thank God. And she was my ally. She protected me against all of them. So I know, like, you wonder sometimes what is the backstory of someone, and you don't know. So
Right.
we got Daisy and Violet, and I love Daisy. What was Daisy's goal?
My idea of Daisy in this book, first of all, she's named for her mother's sister who passed away. And families
Mm,
do that oftentimes. My mother was named for her great aunt who passed away. But I think there's a certain amount of responsibility or a little bit of guilt that goes with that when you're being remembered for the person who passed.
yeah,
So she has that. Also, Daisy in this book is 25 and she wants to live a big life. She's a dancer. She, after graduation, moved to Atlantic City and danced in Atlantic City on stage. While she was there, she went to the clubs. She just lived a different life than she can live in Scranton. But she came home to Scranton when her father was sick. And so she's back here and she's trying to make it. But she still has that big city spark in her and she's unsettled and looking for more, and she, as you know, falls in love, and that's a forbidden love.
that's
And
a big
so I thought that
one,
was an interesting path to take as well.
especially in 1950, at that
Well,
time period, right?
yeah
Yeah.
That's the thing. So the book takes place in 1955, and it's the cusp of the civil rights movement. And I really wanted to explore that. Scranton has a healthy African American population. It's never been larger than, it's never been the majority population, but a very healthy population. But even though we're in the North, we still redlined. We committed all the sins that so many others did. And so, Violet's world, she was in North Scranton, and the Black neighborhood was toward downtown. So until this book, she wouldn't have had really a reason to sort of interact with people of other races. And so I thought this was the time to make her world bigger.
Why now? It feels like I grew up in the South Bronx.
Okay. I love
Yeah,
that. I
it
love
was
that.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it never dawned on me that I had to be afraid of anybody. It was a black neighborhood, white neighborhood, and I really didn't care.
I
I
love that.
just, I didn't want. My best friend was the chief of police's daughter, and she was black. Alexis and I were best friends, but she was never allowed. Her parents wouldn't allow her to come to my house, and that
Really?
was just, I don't know why. We
Right.
went to school together. When I graduated junior high school, I was at the top of my class. Don't ask me how I was, and and I went to high school that I didn't want to go to in my new neighborhood, and she said, "If it's good enough for Fran, I'm going there too."
I
And
love
she
that.
followed me. And it's
I love
sad
it.
because I lost track of her. Oh, she was genius. I mean, I'm smart,
Oh,
but she had to be a circuit court judge by now. That's how smart she
wow.
was. So, what did Violet create with four colors?
Oh, so I
That
found
was
this
so
to
cool.
Thank you. Thank you. You're the first person to ask about that. I think it's
Really?
interesting. Yeah. So in real life, I had a neighbor, Helen. She was in her late 80s when I knew her. And come to find out, Helen used to hand paint black and white photographs to add the color. She used to colorize them. And I thought that was such an interesting job that I gave it to
Yeah.
Violet. And when I was researching color theory, I discovered that the four colors could be used to create all shades of skin. And so, really, this idea that we're not so different, it's just different proportions of shading and so forth. So, my Violet in Rain Breaks No Bones, the new book, is so focused on this new person she met named Zethray that even though she's painting a graduation portrait and mixing the proportions for the skin of the white girl, her brain goes and adds the extra dimensions
Oh, nice.
and actually more of a chestnut.
That is so cool because the only thing I was allowed to paint with is paint by numbers.
Me too. I have no artistic ability.
Nothing.
I when I was researching, I bought, oh, I don't have them here, but I bought a packet of paints from the 1940s that would have
Yeah.
been used at the time so I could see what they were like and play with them a little bit.
Well, that's why I had a niece that created the covers of my books. And I
Nice.
said to her, you know, I said, and I was upset because she didn't want to do the last two. And you don't, when you have a cover artist that knows what they're doing, it's
Right.
better than somebody in a publishing company that's in a fog
There you
and doesn't
go.
quite get it.
You get to ask for what you want. You you
That's
have
right.
you
So
have a
tell us
say in it.
about Grace. And this was so cool because my mother told me about them, but I wouldn't know about the S&H green stamps.
Oh, well, we still had S&H green stamps when I was growing up.
My mother told me about that.
Yeah. So Grace is very loosely based on my great grandmother, Louise. Her name was Louise. And I love Grace because I followed
Yeah.
Grace through the trauma of losing a child. But S&H green stamps, if you went to the local supermarket, either the Acme or the A&P here, you would get the S&H green stamps as
Really?
a reward. And we had booklets, and you would lick them and put them in the booklets. And when you had a full book, so many books, you could go to the catalog and order merchandise. When I first graduated from college, I was a teacher. I was a high school teacher for over 30 years. And when I got my first teaching assignment, my mother ordered things for me from the S&H Green Stamps catalog. So it was still, that was the early 80s, and we still had S&H Green Stamps here.
Well, I taught for a lot of years in a tough school in the Bronx.
Did you really?
I'm the reading and writing specialist. Yeah.
Wow. I was a high school English teacher, grades
Well,
7 through 12.
the last, first, second two classes I had IGC, they gave me the geniuses. They were bussed in, and I was challenged because I had to really be smart,
Right. There's a
really,
lot of
really
prep that
smart.
goes into
And
that.
if I made a point, they didn't hesitate. And I know that because they're still on Facebook reminding me how I tortured them all the
Ah,
way back then. I became the reading specialist because I decided I had two grades. I would teach two, second and third, fourth, and all the discipline problems. If they were bad, I got them. And you know what? Didn't bother me.
good.
But as a
Good.
reading specialist, there was a talent that you have to get kids to want to read. They remind me of that every day too.
Yeah, but
So
you
yeah,
you were doing God's work because getting kids to read is really
teaching
important.
is the best profession in the world, and people
Yeah.
just didn't appreciate us. So
Well, I
now
loved it.
this is the fun part is, so why did a television set? She wanted a television, and you know what? I always wanted one in my room, and I couldn't have one.
Oh, see, so it
Until I got
resonated.
married to Jeff, I never had a television. I have a wide screen now. I never had a TV. My mother said, "You can't watch television. You have homework." Yeah, I know. Don't rub it in.
That was a good mother. Well, I was trying to, I do a lot of research, all primary sources. I want to find out what people were writing about at the time period. And televisions were huge. People were starting to get televisions. And I even read where people would put the antenna on their roofs to make it look like they had a television. So it was a status symbol to have a TV. And I thought it would be interesting to, give them a television and open that world to them. What originally I was going to have them get a television from the S&H Screen Stamp store, but there were no TVs in the catalog, so I had to figure out a whole other way to get them a television. And in the end, that added to the story, so that brought Stanley into the situation.
We had a store around the corner on Southern Boulevard that sold everything. But the
Ah,
guy was friends with my father, and I didn't know that I could get whatever I want, including the top 100 records. If I was got only if I got all A's that week.
well, that was good. That was incentive, right?
Yeah, not only that, it had to be 100. If I didn't get 100 on the test in 99, my mother made me write it over. And I used to say that, oh, God. After a while, I go, Mom, I got 100, don't worry about it. So now we
You
have
smartened up.
Daisy and Teddy. And how come you flash back to them?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
When I was writing this book, every book I've written, the process is a little different. And this one, I wrote quite a few of the scenes out of order. And I wrote the chapter with Daisy going to Rocky Glen, which was a real amusement park here back in the day, and having the encounter with Teddy. I didn't know where it was going to go in the book. I didn't know why I wrote it. But at some point, I just decided to start trusting the ideas as they came. And it ended up being a big turning point in the novel. So I'm glad I did. But I wrote that chapter. I didn't know where it belonged, what it would be. But I wanted to show young love. I wanted to show
Yeah.
blurred lines. Teddy is pretty much a cad, but I think it's a good discussion question as to,
Yeah.
did he cross the line? What happened there? And I loved the idea that she tried so hard to distance herself from her mother's shame because everyone in town thinks the mother had the baby out of wedlock. And here she ends up with a boy who talks about her anyway. So it's very similar to what her mother has gone through in town.
You know who I really love? There are two characters I love. I love Stanley and
Thank you.
Violet. But this was really great because this brought life back to really fantastic. And that's Johnny. When she meets Johnny, that's a hard one because the relationship and the mother was not happy. Either mother was unhappy. And
Right.
yet, there was something about him. I can't blame her.
Well, it's interesting. So I'm a white woman, and I was
Yeah.
writing, I was including Black characters in this book with major roles, and I'll be honest, it stopped me for a while because didn't want to do it wrong, and I wanted to be respectful. And in the end, when I wrote the book, I made sure that my editors this time were all African American. And one of my editors, Vilinda Bryant, she's a wonderful woman. She really took me to task because I didn't go far enough. When things would get a little bit uncomfortable about dealing with racial issues between Johnny and Daisy, I would have one or the other say, "Oh, let's not talk about it now. Let's just enjoy each other." So I took the coward's way out, and she let me know I really needed to confront those issues. And so, I did a lot of interviews, read a lot of material written at the time by Black authors. And I just felt Johnny. I saw Johnny. I also saw Johnny as an outsider. In Scranton, we live near the Tobyhanna Army Depot, and in the 60s, we had an influx of people from Maryland come in to Scranton to work at the depot, and many of them were African American, and it changed a little bit, the dynamics in the city. And so I liked that idea of an outsider coming in and looking at Scranton and looking at this white population. Daisy is saying, "Oh, we're pretty open-minded, and we don't have
Yeah.
problems." And he says, "Yeah, but what about you can't be in Southside after sundown?" Well, Daisy never knew that. So I wanted an outsider to come in and give her that perspective.
So now we have his mother,
Mhm.
Zilray, and she has some special abilities, and she's not happy with the fact that he wants to go out with Daisy.
Yeah.
And then Violet says the truth about something.
Well, here's the thing. So Zethray, I absolutely
Yes.
love
I
Zethray.
like her.
I do too. And her name came from a friend of mine that I used to teach with. But, she's a pragmatist. And she has nothing against Daisy. She just knows that the world is not going to be easy for either one of them.
Yeah.
And that Johnny needs to stick with, really, in her words, his own kind. And Violet feels the same way. Violet and Zethray see the same problems in their future. And so I didn't want to make it seem like everybody was lovey-dovey and great with this relationship, because that wouldn't be the truth, especially in 1955. Not to say we had interracial couples in Scranton at that time period. I interviewed quite a few people whose parents were married in the 40s and 50s who were, interracial couples. So it happened here, but it was not common.
This is so amazing. I know. Growing up where I grew up, and then I moved to another neighborhood, whatever, you still had the same discrimination, no
Right,
matter how you turned it.
right.
And I had a bigger problem because my mother was the PTA president.
Oh,
And
dear.
that made it harder for me to be accepted by the teachers and the students because they figured if I had a problem, I never told my mother and I fought my own battles. And I
Good.
said, "You're not here to do," and it would cause more trouble if
Right,
your mother came to school for you.
right.
And I really didn't care. I figured, you know what, I'm who I am. And then I was taken in by the UFT chapter chairman in high school, so I learned how to run the union and
Ah,
a whole
okay.
bunch of stuff. And they never told them that my mother was the PTA president. I
Wow.
I didn't want it. I didn't want them to know anything
Right.
because I had one or two teachers that knew, and I wasn't I was a good kid, so I was, pretty smart. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. So you didn't
So
want them to know. That makes total sense.
yeah. So how does Daisy meet Mickey, and how would you describe him? And then this is so cool. She has a dance studio, Daisy, and she manages to cancel lessons to be with Johnny. You see, I would do that too. I
Well, because
seriously would do that too.
she lived with her family, so she couldn't be alone with him, and they were dating in
Yeah.
secret. So Mickey is a little boy who comes up to the dance studio. His grandmother sends him up there for lessons because he's bow-legged, and she thinks that if he gets dance
I
lessons, it's
remember
going to help him.
that.
And he's a character in himself. And so they form this relationship. He becomes a student at the studio, but he also meets Johnny, and there's a little bit of a connection there with all of them. Mickey is young and innocent and doesn't understand racism at this point, and so he doesn't see that Johnny's any different from anybody, and they form a little bit of a bond themselves.
That is so cool. I know. And the sad part is that they had to sneak around, but
Yes.
then I couldn't do that because my grandfather knew everything I did.
See,
When he came
so
to
it would
live
be
with us,
hard.
you know, one guy walked in one day, and I was just going out as a friend, and he told him you could go out with her today, but never again.
Wow.
Yeah, he had
Yeah.
his own particular idea
Yeah.
of what. I didn't listen. Whatever. So
Well,
they
they did
found
sneak
out.
around.
So how will Zelway react to Daisy? How does his mother react to them? That's a hard one.
It is a hard one. So Zethray becomes a second mother to Johnny. He found her in the Green Book when he came to Scranton, and that's where he's living. And he takes her opinion seriously, but he also thinks she's of a different generation, and you know, people nowadays are more open-minded.
Yeah.
So that's what he's going by. And I wanted to make this effort when I wrote Scranton that it was no better or no worse than any other place. We think of racism, we think of the South.
Yeah.
And of course, it was here as well. Scranton's history with racism, it's fairly uneven. There are times, really in the early times, when enslaved people would run away. Some of the time we
Yeah.
would save them and stand up for them, and some of the time we would turn them back over. So our record is, 50% at best, and I wanted to explore that
I know. You see it all over the news, and that bothers me.
for
It
sure.
really, it really, it really does. Because growing up where I did, my father owned a cleaning store in a very bad neighborhood, really bad, and he
Okay,
made me work there on
good.
Saturday. And I learned how to. My sister was gorgeous. She was the most beautiful thing. When I lost my sister, I lost my soulmate, my troublemaker. And my sister did the register, and he stuck me in the back with the presser because I was like this.
Oh
And
no,
I learned how to bag, press, and mark the work.
wow,
It was hard, yeah. And the
that's hard work.
presser was a black presser. I loved him. He was so cool, told me stories. And his two daughters wound up in one of my classes.
Oh,
And
nice.
the guy, it was an experience. And I said to my father, and it was a really bad neighborhood. And the police came around one day and they protected my father because you know what they wanted. And it was worth it because they never had to
Mhm.
worry about anybody coming into the store to bother you.
All right,
Yeah.
different
So
times,
now,
right?
what happens to Grace? And how, this scares me. How did you create the two storms and the people that were endangered together? I hate rain and snow.
Well, first of all, as a writer, I don't outline.
Yeah.
So I find the story as I go.
Yeah.
But what I do is I do a lot of historical research. And in 1955, we had a huge flood in really all up the East Coast. Hurricane Diane came in August of 1955, and it was devastating. In Scranton, we lost a lot of property and a couple of people. In the Poconos, which is further up, uh,
Yeah.
there was either a Boy Scout camp or a church camp there, and it was all boys, and they kept moving up a floor as the rains came, and they were finally on the top floor, and the building was swept away, and over 40 of them, they were all killed. So it was a devastating flood, and
Yeah.
I when I write, for these books, I like to find some sort of historical event that's happened at the time period and sort of work my way to it. So in the first book, I was working my way to the Billy Sunday snowstorm, which was huge in Scranton. In the second book, there were coal strikes and union fights and all that. And then the third one was Hurricane Diane. But what was interesting was we had a very dry summer, but a week before Hurricane Diane came up the coast, Hurricane Connie came. And so we were inundated with water. And by the time Diane came, there was no place for it to go, the gutters and so on. Everything was full. And so we had the flooding.
Yeah. It's scary. There was a really bad hurricane one day, and I had to go on my radio show, and you couldn't do it. You couldn't do anything. And the worst part is that the people didn't understand. I said, I'm living here, and it was in the Bronx,
Right.
Hurricane Irene, and it
Oh,
was
right.
oh, it was awful. And on top of which, the water was flooding up until the elevator. So I wound up
Oh,
walking down 17 flights of stairs. And my husband said, let me go to my office in New Jersey so we could have coffee and relax. Of course, he had to go to work, but so what? It was like
right.
1 o'clock in the morning. I
Right.
got used to it. So, this character, tell us about Clarence and tell us more about Ruth Jones. My mother was a Ruth.
Aw, I
And
love the
she
name
was a
Ruth.
tough nut to crack, too.
Aw. I knew a Ruth Jones from my church, so I liked
I
the name
love
when I
her.
used it. I loved this idea. I originally Ruth and Zethray were one character when I was writing, and then I realized they weren't the same person. So I created Ruth and Zethray. And so Ruth is Zethray's mother, and Zethray's mother committed suicide, and Zethray never understood why or what. And so we get Zethray's background as well. I absolutely love Clarence. Clarence is Zethray's stepfather. He came into the picture. He loved her. He was good with his hands. He could make anything for anybody. He was a good man. But Zethray never warmed up to him because she had her mother to herself for 10 years. And then suddenly this man comes along and he gets the best pork chop and he gets the mashed potatoes with the butter on top.
Uh,
And suddenly she has to share her love, which is a kid's, completely normal for a kid. But because Clarence and her mother both died when Zethray was young, she was never really able to resolve that guilt. She carried it with her because, anybody would say, well, you were a kid. Of course you felt that way. But she never had a chance to outgrow it because he was killed.
it's sad.
Yeah. And
So, who,
he
who
played
is, I like Clarence, too.
Thank you. He played baseball, and we did have all black local baseball teams here, so that was accurate. And they
That I
played
read books
the
about
white
that.
teams.
I just finished a book about that. Homefield,
Ah,
the Homefield team, and it was a black baseball team that won, and I was like rooting for them the whole time.
good.
And in the last chapter, when they won, I was like, yes. They didn't come out first; they came out second, and I
Oh,
felt bad because I felt that they deserved to win.
right, right. Oh, that's
So,
after all that
why does
rooting.
Violet work in a factory?
Well, when I was doing my research, something I came across in the research was that at some point they took the miners' widows' pensions and cut them in half. Now
Mm,
imagine if today I cut whatever your income is, whether it's Social Security, whether you have businesses,
yeah,
if I just said, okay, you're only going to make half the money now that you were making before. And these were widows, they were older, they didn't have skills. They weren't trained to go into the workforce. But Violet needed to work.
yeah.
And so she ends up finding a job. The Lace Works is a famous lace factory in Scranton. We made lace for people all over the country. We had looms here that were shipped in from Nottingham, England. They were iron looms. They were 2 stories high, huge,
Mm.
and they made the lace. And so it was a great place for people to work. They had a bowling alley. They had beauty
Oh,
shops.
nice.
They had a cafeteria. They had all kinds of amenities. So it was really a good place to get a job.
Now, my brother was the regional manager for Brunswick Rockers Bowl.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And
Well, I've certainly heard of
unfortunately,
them.
I did the telemarketing for the league. I hated every minute of it. It's not even that. You call up and you go, "Hi, this is Fran from Brunswick Yonkers Bowl." The women's leagues weren't bad, but the men's league, one lady said to me, "What, are you having a date with my husband?"
Oh,
I said, "I don't even know who he is." I didn't know who anybody was. And
right,
I said, "You know what? Just tell him the information and goodbye."
right.
I was hysterical laughing. And I had to be careful
Funny.
because my brother watched everything I did, whoever I spoke to, which was nobody. And I was in the back office with the person in charge of the office. I hated it, but the people there were fun.
Well,
So
good.
what can
At
I
least
say?
you had
Yeah.
people to talk to. Yeah.
So who is Arlene? Where did she come into this?
Yeah, Arlene, so Stanley has been Violet's love interest off and on throughout the books. And in this book, they're not speaking. And Violet says she doesn't care, but of course, there's a part of her that does. And so she hears the rumor that Arlene is dating Stanley, and she has a thing or
Ooh,
but later on she actually gets to know Arlene, and we see a whole other side to her.
I love Stanley. He's
Me
really
too.
cool.
Me too.
He's cool.
Yeah.
Now, the final chapter that what's back to that storm. How did they save so many people? And how did they unite in the unexpected? How many people were they able to save? Because during a storm like that, you're lucky that you live. And then to go out into the bad weather is
Right.
insanity.
Right. That's a good question. I don't have numbers. I know that so Scranton, basically you have north, south, east,
Yeah.
west, and downtown. And this storm really hit south side. So that would be about a quarter of our population at then about 25,000 people. But I don't know of them, how many of them were home. So I have lived in Scranton most of a good chunk of my life, and we still have floods, and we have a levee system now, so it doesn't flood like it did. But when I was growing up, men would get in their rowboats and go get people out of their homes and take them to higher ground, and that's how it was done. So literally, people went out during Hurricane Diane with fishing boats and rescued people from their
That's
second
hard.
windows and all of that. So they really did rescue. Like I said, we only had one or two people who perished, which is tragic. But given how quickly the storm came through and people weren't prepared for it, it's amazing that we only had those people pass away.
I think that people need to be trained for these things. And I think with what's
Well,
going
sure.
on, and I read on Facebook, it makes me sick to think about all the people in the FCDC were fired that were trying to save lives. You see, if they were smart, they'd take a group of them and go to a foreign country and continue to what they're working. Because
Huh,
you know what? Yeah, that's it's criminal.
absolutely.
And all the cuts and stuff, and they want to get rid of the Department of Education. You
Right.
know, and all the years I'm on Facebook, because it's like I don't answer, I don't comment. I just post my show. I don't even post this because I don't need them to know what I'm doing.
Right.
And it's like I only commented for the very first time the other day when somebody wrote something about the Department of Ed, and I said, Michael, you was well said. Thank you for showing that somebody cared about something that I did for 37 years.
Good. Good. We have to speak up. We have to.
Yeah, we have
This
to speak
is
up and
these are
speak out.
dangerous times.
Yeah, but there's so many people speaking out in a negative way with bad words.
Right.
And you could say anything you want about the president or anything you want about him. It's not
Right.
going to matter. Basically, he needs a makeup artist, seriously,
Well, that's for sure.
to get that smush off his face. The
That's for
funny
sure.
part is that a long time ago, he wrote 3 books, and I was asked to review all of them.
Were you really?
Yeah, they were. He asked himself. The
Okay.
third book I turned down because I wasn't going to read a book that, the information went against my better judgment. So I started to
Good.
read it and I said, I'm sorry, I'll pass. They wanted to know if I wanted to interview him, and I said no.
Well, then I feel privileged because
Yes, I don't, I just,
you interviewed me.
well, I'm interviewing, I should say, next week. Tomorrow, the author of The Base, Dante, she's freaking amazing. She's a research scientist, so it's interesting.
Oh, good.
On Monday, Stasia Moffat with 2 books, The Missing Girl and Justice Beth. But on Tuesday, we got the big guy who writes for Criminal Minds, D.P. Lyle.
Wonderful.
And then on March 5th, Tess Gerritsen. I
You
don't know
are
how. She was the very first author that I had the guts to ask personally and email her and ask her to be on a different radio show that I was given an hour by somebody else. And she did it. And she's been doing 1 or 2 shows every single year.
wonderful. Wonderful.
Oh, she's got a heart of gold.
Wonderful. Well, you're doing great work by
I'm trying. I
letting
love
the
doing
world know
this.
about authors and their books. So,
I love this. And when I'm done, pray to God that I don't mess up. I have to download the video, save it, download it again, save it, and pray to God that I don't mess it up, and send it, and send your publishers the YouTube link or any
okay.
link you want. Or
Sounds good.
any link you want. I know it's on LinkedIn.
Well,
If I put the video on LinkedIn, you'll get about 500 views in 5 minutes.
oh, good.
I
Okay.
get followed. Yeah, last week I had 695 views.
Excellent. Well, I'm
I
glad
have
you're
no
in
idea
charge of the
why.
tech because I'm
Yeah.
not a tech person. So,
So then we have Grace. I got nervous. What almost happened to her? I said, she can't kill off Grace. No.
I know. I know. Um, you know, I wanted to explore how the family, what would bring the family together,
Yeah.
because Violet and Lily needed to have a conversation about Daisy's future. And sometimes we put those hard conversations off until something happens. So in this case, Grace was very sick. She was at death's door. So of course that brought everybody to town. But yeah, I decided I was going to let Grace keep going for a few more years.
She needs her own book. Grace needs her own book.
Well,
Seriously.
thank you.
So
Thank
how
you.
did you tie in Daisy? I love Daisy, who tells Violet about Johnny. That's a
Well,
hard one.
yeah, again,
I
that
like him
sort of,
too.
thank you. That kind of came out, she and Johnny kept saying, "Oh, we will tell our families," and they hadn't quite done it, and they had decided they were going to, but then uh, there's a situation where Daisy's husband spills the beans. And so, Daisy wasn't able to control that story and tell it her own way. And
Yeah,
uh, so that creates a lot of conflict for the family as well.
I
Because
love.
it's that idea of family stories and family secrets. And you
Yeah,
were saying about how your family didn't tell the stories about your grandmother and so on. We all have those family stories that people try
yeah.
to keep secret. But in the end, somebody always finds out. So that's the thing with secrets, right?
You know what's really bad is that sometimes when you marry somebody out of faith, forget about out of color, out of faith, they disown you.
Well, and
They literally just disown you, and
yep,
that is the sad part about it. And I have intermarriages in my family all over the place. I mean, there's Catholic, there's Spanish, there's whatever, and who cares?
and who cares?
And who
Exactly.
cares?
But that was a big deal. That was,
They do. They will
that was a
disown you.
huge deal. Yeah, yeah. In the first book, nope, in the second book, actually, Stanley and Violet don't get together because she's Protestant and he's Catholic. So that was an issue, especially in Scranton. You kind of stayed with your own people. And like you said, who cares? Let's just love each other,
I believe that, and maybe I'm a majority of myself, that everybody is who they are and everybody's equal.
right?
And I think for all the years in my school, 37 years of teaching black kids, Spanish kids, white kids, not once, and I have to admit, not one kid ever said to me, other than, we love you, you're who you are. And they never, ever, ever accused me of anything. But I think the funniest story is I came back from Puerto Rico and I was darker than them because my
Oh,
father was dark. My father was black dark, and my
okay.
aunt. So I walked in and a kid walked up to me. He says, "You know, Miss Swergloff, your black is showing."
Oh,
And I
dear.
looked at him and I said, "You finally got it right." And he cracked up laughing and he said, "You see, she didn't even get insulted. She finally told us the truth." And this was a 6 year old.
You had a good relationship, a good rapport with your kids.
Oh,
That's important.
till this day, if you look on Facebook, one of them is a black activist that I'm proud of. One of
Good.
them is a self-care person. One of them created a self-care thing. There's a whole bunch of teachers up there and a whole bunch of lawyers, and one
Wonderful.
of them owns his own boutique. And one
Wonderful.
of them is my foot
Lots of
doctor.
success stories.
Paul's my foot doctor. So you
Ah,
have, yeah, you know, you just don't know how anybody. So, what's next for you?
Well, believe it or not, I've started writing another book,
Oh,
and
good,
this one takes place in Scranton as well. It's not part of this
good.
other; it's a standalone, but it's the 1970s, early to mid 70s.
Oh, good.
I'm particularly looking at the women's lib movement, and it's early yet, but I've been having a lot of fun researching it.
I love those books. You know what? I love books that have relationships and kind and stuff. And I love the books that overcome racism. What I don't love is the hate that's within the books.
Yes.
And that bothers me too. And I won't read a book with a whole lot of bad words.
Well, there you go. Well, mine are pretty tame, so I think you're okay. Yeah, I've just been enjoying the process, and I'm character driven. My books, I think, are character driven, so I like to tell their stories.
So, question. Will Violet ever open up her eyes to Stanley? I love Stanley. I wanted to send her a note like, wake up, kid.
I
How
know.
often do you find someone that's perfect?
I would like to think she does. I
Yeah, we
certainly
can't
end
tell.
it on a note of possibility. So it's up to you as the reader to decide. You get to write their ending.
Now, I know the storm has something to do with this. Rain breaks no bones. What does the title mean? I love that title. And that's what
Thank
got me
you.
open the book. You have to see, I write in these things.
Oh, good.
It's destroyed. No, it's all right because my dermatologist takes all my books. I've got about a
Oh,
hundred for
good.
him. He's getting this one too. His wife loves me.
Well, of course she does. That's a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah, she.
Rain breaks no bones is an old Welsh proverb, and basically, a little rain won't hurt you. And the reason I used that was my first book is called Sing in the Morning, Cry at Night, which is a Welsh proverb. And so once I decided to write 3 books with the same family, I
Yeah.
decided to use Welsh proverbs. So there's Sing in the Morning, Cry at Night, and then All Waiting is Long. And my new book is Rain Breaks No Bones. And they can be read in any order. They're standalone books, but they are connected because of the family.
So when am I getting it? The next one.
As soon as I write it,
I know. I'm writing one
I
too, but
I will add you to my list. I
yes,
will make
please.
sure I reach out to you when it's finished for sure.
I write horror. Nobody understands why I wrote it. The last
Oh,
book
I
is
love that.
called Voices from Beyond. The one
Okay.
before it is called Mirror Image. And the point of it is if you do something wrong to someone else and you don't repent, you wind up as a permanent face in the mirror.
Oh,
Yeah, and the last one,
that's
I wrote
good.
8 stories. Some of the stories are true. I wrote 8 stories and nobody got it. I wrote about my principal and I that had a problem. I wrote about somebody in my. I wrote all true stories about people that did the wrong thing and I made them pay for what they did, including something that happened to me. That's why I can't sit up straight because I have nerve damage in my neck. My dentist forgot to tell me I had something there that wasn't supposed to be there.
Oh
So
no.
I'm fine. It's just that it always hurts me. So that's why I can't sit up.
Oh, I'm sorry
It's like,
about
it's
that.
weird. It's okay. It keeps me skinny.
Ah,
That's all. So where can we find out more about you and your work?
I have a website, barbarajtaylor.com. And if you go to that website, you can find out. I have readers' guides for book clubs. I have backstories for all of my books. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find me on Instagram.
Yeah.
And those links are on my website. And you can purchase the book at any place books are sold. And on March 25th, the audio will be coming out. The audio book is finally coming out. So you can buy Kindle, you can buy a hard copy, or as of March 25th, you'll be able to buy the audio.
That is so fantastic because my books are on Kindle Unlimited.
Good.
Unfortunately, the publisher that just did my book did not get me any reviews at all.
Oh, see,
And
this is
I
such
asked
a
her
hard
seven.
business.
There's a lot of discrepancy with what she did. I can't say, but the book was not published right. I had to send it off of Amazon because there were grammar errors
Oh
and
dear.
spelling errors. Yeah, it was bad. And nobody reviewed. Only she. I said, you reviewing the book means nothing. I got to get reviews. So I just chalk it up to, and I'm going to write something different that I've never written before. I have a title. Now I just have to figure out what happens when somebody, a strange delivery guy is going to deliver a package to the doorstep. I have to decide what happens when the person opens it and what's in it.
Ooh, I like that.
Yes, it's different. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This has
I've
been
had so
wonderful.
much fun.
Good.
I'm going to end the stream, so don't get nervous if you disappear.
Okay. All
And
right.
I'm going to actually, I did very good, 50 minutes, not bad, very good. And I'm going to pray to God that I don't mess up downloading it. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
Thank
day,
you.
everybody. And bye. Let me see if I do this right.